I was my dad's only child. You'd think that being the only kid would make a father want to be protective, especially of his little girl. But life doesn't always work out the way it's supposed to. In our house, instead of hugs and bedtime stories, I grew up bracing for blows. The hitting was bad, sure, but it wasn't just that, it was worse in ways I didn't have words for back then. When you're just 6 years old, survival isn't about plans or running away. It's about getting through the next moment. And when you're too little to even think about escape, you learn to endure, because there's no other choice. I guess part of me always knew when trouble was brewing. Even at 6, I could feel the tension in the air like the prickle of static before a storm. That night was no different. It was a Friday evening, and once the sun dipped below the horizon, I knew the beatings would come. It was only a matter of when. They always came. "Go, Emma. Go hide in the closet and wait for me," my mom whispered, her voice trembling, but steady enough to push me into action. My mom, Maria, was the strongest woman I've ever known. A Cuban immigrant with a heart bigger than any room in that house, she'd been fighting battles long before I was born. I didn't know back then what a restraining order was, much less why it didn't seem to stop him. All I knew was that when she told me to hide, I had to listen. It was the same routine every time. The second I heard the rumble of his truck pulling into the driveway, my body would freeze, like a switch inside me flipped off. That deep, choking smell of exhaust would snake through the vents, mixing with the faint scent of cleaning supplies my mom had used earlier in the day. I hated that smell. It was like a warning sign. You could tell what kind of night it was going to be by the way he slammed the car door. That night, when I heard the driver's side door crash shut, the sound was so loud I swear the earth shook. Then came the sound of shattering glass and my stomach dropped. His window had broken, and in that moment I knew this wasn't just bad. It was going to be one of those nights, the kind that left more than bruises. I was just a kid, and fear had a way of locking my whole body in place. It was like being caught in the blinding beam of a flashlight, too scared to move, even though every part of me was screaming to run. When the front door burst open with a deafening crack and his voice thundered through the house, "Maria. Maria, you bitch. That door better be unlocked." I felt like the walls themselves were shaking with his rage. I stayed in the closet, my small hands clutching the hem of my dress, my heart pounding so loud it echoed in my ears. The closet was dark and cramped, with clothes brushing against my face, but it felt like the only safe place in the world. I stared at the floor, trying to focus on anything else. That's when I saw them, 2 ants scuttling across the wood, each carrying crumbs from a broken potato chip. Watching them helped me escape in my head, even if my body couldn't leave. Then I heard it. That sickening, hollow thud that meant my mom had hit the kitchen floor. I had this strange way of surviving moments like that, of protecting myself from the worst of it. My mind would drift off, like it was floating above the room, watching everything happen from a distance. I'd focus on a crack in the wall, or the way the light fell through the blinds, pretending I wasn't there at all. But my mom didn't have that escape. Not that night. Not ever. Her voice didn't even get the chance to rise before his fists came down. "Emma, sweetie. Daddy's home. Come out, and Daddy won't be mad." His voice slurred, echoing off the walls of the small house. Every muscle in my tiny body tightened like a spring pulled too far. I couldn't move. I couldn't even draw in a full breath. Tears spilled from my eyes, hot and silent, streaming down my cheeks in rivers. By 6 years old, I'd already learned how to cry without making a sound. From my hiding spot in the closet, I could hear the sound of his boots stomping across the first floor. Each step was uneven, dragging and heavy, like he could barely hold himself upright. He was drunker than usual, so drunk that it made my stomach churn with a sick, twisting dread. And I knew what that meant. Mom was hurt. Hurt badly. Normally, she'd do whatever she could to stop him from reaching the stairs. She'd throw her body in front of him, push back, fight with everything she had. It always ended the same way, with bruises and blood. But at least it slowed him down. Not tonight. Tonight, there was only silence from the kitchen, broken by the dull, menacing thud of his boots as he started toward the staircase. 1, 2, 3 steps. The old wooden staircase creaked under his weight, the sound stretching through the silence like a cruel whisper. My breath caught in my throat as I listened. Each step he took felt like a countdown to disaster. "Emma, here I come." His voice rang out, slurred and sing-song, dripping with mockery. "You'd better be special for me tonight. Be a good girl and come out." The words sent ice racing through my veins, and my tiny fists clenched so tightly that my nails bit into my palms. Mom always told me to hide in a different spot each time to make it harder for him to find me. And I listened because I trusted her. But she never once told me to run, not out of the house, not into the night, not anywhere that might lead to freedom. Deep down, I think she knew I wouldn't. I couldn't. The thought of leaving her behind, knowing he'd turn all of his fury on her the moment I was gone, was something I couldn't even begin to imagine. 4, 5, he was almost at the top. My heart felt like a trapped bird, battering against my ribcage as panic set in. My mind screamed at me to move, to run, to do something. Go! The bathroom! Hide behind the shower curtain before it's too late. But no matter how loud those thoughts were, my legs stayed frozen. I was like a deer caught in the headlights of an oncoming truck, too paralyzed by fear to save myself. Instead, I stayed where I was, trembling in the darkness, clutching the folds of my dress like they might somehow shield me. Tears pooled in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Crying made noise, and noise was the last thing I could afford. "Mommy," I whispered under my breath, so quietly even I could barely hear it. "If ghosts are real, please do something. Please protect me." And then it happened. That sound, the one I'd been dreading. The sharp, unmistakable creak of the broken top step. He was here. He was at the top of the stairs. The silence that followed was deafening. My mind was screaming at me now, the thoughts almost too loud to bear. The bathroom. He'll check the closet first, he always does. Run. But my body wouldn't move. The fear was like chains wrapped around my ankles, rooting me to the spot. I could only sit there, shivering, as the heavy thuds of his boots echoed closer and closer. The bathroom door creaked open with an eerie slowness, the sound making my skin crawl. I bit down on my lip to keep from gasping, the metallic taste of blood filling my mouth. My heart was pounding so violently now that I was sure he could hear it too. Then came the sound of metal scraping against metal as he yanked the shower curtain off its hinges with a violent tug. "No Emma in here," he bellowed, his voice wild and filled with rage. "Where is she? Where did you hide her this time, Maria?" The venom in his words was enough to make me flinch, even from the safety of my hiding spot. He sounded furious, but beneath that anger, there was something else: confusion. The drunken haze clouding his mind was slowing him down, making him sloppier. It was the tiniest sliver of hope, but even that felt too fragile to cling to. I pressed my back harder against the wall, willing myself to disappear into the shadows. He was so close now, too close, and every fiber of my being was bracing for what was coming next. I sat there in the darkness, trembling so hard that the wooden floor beneath me seemed to shift. Sweat dripped from my face, soaking the collar of my shirt and mixing with the salt of silent tears. My fingers traced over the soft skin of my arms, brushing against the ridges and dips of scars that hadn't yet faded. Each one was a story etched in pain, nights like this, moments of terror, the sharp bite of objects hurled in anger, and the bruises that painted my skin in purple and blue. My mind kept looping the same desperate question: how much worse will it be this time? How much more can a little body like mine endure? I could hear him just beyond the bedroom door. His boots scraped against the floor, their heavy tread echoing through the thin walls. Then, they stopped. My heart pounded so violently it felt like it would burst. The silence that followed was suffocating, the kind of silence that screamed louder than any noise. And then I heard it, a metallic clang, light at first, then harder, against the hollow wood of the door. My blood ran cold. I didn't need to see it to know what he was holding. The bat. That bat. I knew it well. My mind flashed back to the last time he'd wielded it. I remembered the sickening crunch of it connecting with my legs, the searing pain, the way I couldn't walk for weeks afterward. That memory was burned into me, just like the scars on my arms. My hands started shaking uncontrollably. I grabbed at the hem of my shirt, twisting it between my fingers, trying to anchor myself, trying to stop the panic from swallowing me whole. But it wasn't enough. My body betrayed me. The tears spilled over, heavy and hot, streaming down my cheeks in waves. My shoulders heaved with silent sobs, every ounce of my being screaming for release, for an end to the torment. And then, somehow, amidst the storm of fear, a thought began to take shape. A decision. If surviving this nightmare meant stepping out and facing him, no matter how brutal the consequences, I'd do it. Anything was better than waiting in the suffocating dark, paralyzed and powerless. Slowly, I uncurled from my hiding spot. Every muscle in my body screamed in protest, stiff from fear and lack of movement. My knees wobbled as I forced myself to my feet, and for a second, I thought I might collapse. But I didn't. I stood there in that cramped closet, steeling myself for what was to come. The towering 6-foot shadow of a man on the other side of that door was waiting to destroy me, and I knew it. Whether it would be the bat, his fists, or something even worse, I braced myself. I didn't think about tomorrow or even the next minute. All that existed was the here and now. If my little girl's in the closet, come out, wherever you are. His voice slithered through the air, sing-song and dripping with cruelty. I swallowed hard, my throat dry and raw. This was it. This was the moment. But then, something I didn't expect happened. There was a loud thud, followed by a dull vibration that rattled the floor beneath me. It took a second for me to process the sound, but then I realized he had fallen. His drunken stupor had finally betrayed him. Hope flickered to life inside me, a small, fragile ember that was almost too painful to feel. Could this be my chance? Could I finally escape? I stayed frozen for a moment, my mind racing with the possibility. But then an image flashed through my mind, stopping me cold. My mom, lying in the kitchen, her face pale and still, blood pooling around her. The thought struck me like lightning, jolting me out of my paralysis. If I ran now, if I left her behind, would she survive? That image didn't just scare me, it broke the chains fear had wrapped around me. Before I even realized what I was doing, I was moving. My hands shot out to push the closet door open, and I bolted for the bedroom door. My bare feet barely made a sound against the floor as I moved. I didn't have a plan, not really. Just one thought driving me forward. Get out. Just get out. As I reached the doorway, my eyes darted toward him. He was sprawled out on the floor, his massive frame blocking the hallway. The bat had rolled a few feet away, glinting faintly in the dim light. He wasn't unconscious. He was stirring, groaning, his hands pawing weakly at the floor in an attempt to push himself up. My heart skipped a beat. I didn't have much time. I didn't think. I just acted. My legs carried me forward, leaping over his prone body and landing in the hallway beyond. My breath came in ragged gasps as I sprinted toward the back door, my mind screaming, "Go. Go now. Don't stop." I bolted for the back door, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it would break through my chest. Each step echoed in my ears, a frantic drumbeat driving me forward. I didn't dare look back, didn't dare slow down. Freedom was just a few feet away, so close I could almost taste it. The cold night air would greet me, and I'd run until my legs gave out. But just as my hand reached for the doorknob, I froze. Something stopped me dead in my tracks, like an invisible wall had slammed down in front of me. My breath caught at my throat, and my chest heaved as I stood there, motionless. Slowly, I turned my head toward the hallway, drawn by a presence I couldn't explain. And then I saw her. There, bathed in the dim glow of the single overhead bulb, stood my mom. She looked so different from how I'd left her, crumpled and lifeless on the kitchen floor. Now, she was upright, strong, and composed. Not a single scratch marred her face, not a single bruise darkened her skin. It didn't make sense. My mind struggled to reconcile what I was seeing with what I knew to be true. But what held my gaze wasn't just her unscathed appearance. It was what lay at her feet. My dad's massive body sprawled across the floor, motionless, like a toppled giant. His chest didn't rise, and his arms lay limp at his sides. Buried deep in his back was an axe, the polished handle gleaming under the light. A pool of blood spread outward, dark and viscous, soaking into the worn wood planks. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. All I could do was stare, my hands clutching the doorframe so tightly that my knuckles turned white. My knees wobbled, and my vision blurred as tears filled my eyes. My mind screamed questions I didn't have the courage to ask. "Mom?" I finally whispered, my voice trembling. Her head turned slowly toward me, her dark eyes meeting mine. There was no fear in her gaze, no panic, just a calm, quiet resolve that I hadn't seen in her before. And something else. Something I hadn't seen in years. Love. She stepped forward, her movements deliberate and unhurried, and crouched down to my level. Her hands, steady and warm, gently cupped my trembling shoulders. The touch was so soft, so reassuring, that it broke through the dam of emotion inside me. The tears came in a flood, my chest heaving with sobs that I couldn't control. "Mama found a good hiding spot. Baby," she said, her voice soft and full of warmth. "Daddy's never gonna hurt you again." Her words washed over me like a balm, soothing the jagged edges of my soul. For the first time in what felt like forever, the crushing weight of fear began to lift. The walls of dread that had boxed me in for so long began to crumble, letting in slivers of light. I didn't know what to say. I just stared at her, my lips trembling as I tried to form words that wouldn't come. The love in her eyes wrapped around me like a protective shield, something I hadn't felt in so long that it almost didn't seem real. And then, as the silence settled between us, something shifted inside me. For the first time, I felt safe. Truly, deeply safe. The kind of safety that comes from knowing the nightmare is over, that the monster has been vanquished, and that the person who loves you most in the world is there to protect you. In that hallway, surrounded by the remnants of a life filled with pain and terror, my mom became something more than the woman who had shielded me with her body time and time again. She became my hero. She pulled me into her arms, holding me tight as I cried against her shoulder. Her embrace was firm and unyielding, as if she were trying to pour every ounce of her strength into me. And maybe she was. Because from that moment on, I wasn't just a scared little girl anymore. I was her daughter, a survivor, just like her. And together, we'd figure out what came next.